The Joe Rogan Experience.
One of the things, it was really embedded with Christianity after the Spaniards came, 1516 and 1519, 1521, they brought in cattle. And very quickly, Christianity swept through Mesoamerica, specifically in Mexico. And there's a friend of mine who's a PhD called Joe Torre, was in Oaxaca and just found in a church a cross from the 15th century, 1500s, I mean, and soon after the conquistadors and Spanish arrived, and in the center of the cross are psilocybin mushrooms. So Christianity has a long, deep-rooted history with psilocybin mushroom use in Mesoamerica.
Well, there's that ancient depiction of Adam and Eve from.
That's more debatable in my
Is
mind.
it?
Yeah, but here it is. Thank you. This is from Joe Latorre's
Wow,
work.
look at that.
That's a basket
With mushrooms.
with
popping
3
out of it.
mushrooms in the basket, and there is Psilocybin mexicana. And so the mushrooms are phenotypically correct, but there's clearly a mushrooms in a basket. Can the other slide show with the full cross, Joey? I'm not sure.
Did you know Jack Herer?
Yes.
When Jack was alive, before he died, one of the things that he was working on was a book connecting psilocybin mushrooms and Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this massive collection of ancient images, paintings, all these different things. A lot of them were these religious depictions of people that were naked dancing under the, like, it was like a transparent mushroom shape, and they were dancing. It's like something that would indicate that they were under the trance, and they were dancing.
Yeah, this is an example where there's so many different. You could have 100 different potential representations.
Right.
They're not all going to be correct.
But
a few of them are. And this example here,
one that clearly is.
And in the Mazatec tradition, it's called Syncretism, when you have a foreign influence, in this case a religion, coming into an indigenous people, they merge and they still continue their indigenous practices under the umbrella of protection, in this case of Christianity. But in the Mazatec tradition, they believe the tears of Christ is where the mushrooms would appear. They believe the mushrooms were the body of Christ, and therefore you'd never boil them. You never, because you'd be hurting the body of Christ, so you'd only eat them raw or dried.
Oh, interesting.
So really interesting. That's an example of syncretism. And the great Maria Sabina was a devout Catholic, and when she did her psilocybin ceremonies, she had the Holy Trinity. So that's another example where under the umbrella, and from a survival point of view, culturally it makes sense, and they adapted, but they found that this sort of merging of indigenous practices and knowledge of psilocybin and Christianity was very compatible. Just was published, I think 2 weeks ago, at New York University and Johns Hopkins. They had 24 clergy from different faiths, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, and Muslims, and they had them come in and they did high doses of psilocybin. And they had one group that had delayed it, didn't do it for 6 months, and the other group did a high dose of psilocybin. Each of those faiths, the use of psilocybin mushrooms reinforced their belief in their faith. That was really amazing. I think they said 95% said is the most significant experience in the top 5 are the most significant experiences in their life. So I think psilocybin makes nicer people.
No, I would agree with you on that. The image of Adam and Eve, I'm curious to say, what do you think is debatable about that? Can you pull up that fresco? There's an ancient fresco, I believe it's from France, of Adam and Eve, which supposedly is the tree of life, but really looks like some sort of a mushroom plant.
Yes, it's been postulated by R. Gordon Wasson.
I shouldn't say plant.
Yeah.
In front of you especially.
Thank you very much.
That doesn't look like mushrooms?
They do look like mushrooms. And
I couldn't imagine it being anything else.
Well, I mean, here's an example that basically artists become authors of field guides and art.
Right.
You know, how much can you tell to the public without violating your oath of secrecy? And so symbology. But yes, there's a cap and a stem, and they come up in clusters. That looks like a psilocybin mushroom. Some people say it's Amanita muscaria because of the dots. But those of us who have grown Psilocybe cubensis, when they're very fresh, they have dots on them. They're very ephemeral. They got washed away. So yes.
And you would see the dots, obviously, if it's still in the ground.
If it's in the ground, it's very fresh. But psilocybin mushrooms, bruised bluish. And so this is where we could get lost in a debate of interpretation. But all these representations are not false. Some of these representations are extremely strong based on the evidence. And for instance, the psilocybin mushrooms that we found on the pyramids in Egypt, they are clearly psilocybes. Not myself, but other Egyptologists have also published on this.
Find those, Jamie. Those are fascinating.
Yep.
Because I don't think until fairly recently, within the last few decades, it was understood that they were using psilocybin. I think there was some confusion as to what, if anything, like they were drinking. Blue lotus, I think, was one of them.
The blue lotus is a water lily. Where do water lilies grow?
There it is.
The water lilies grow near ponds.
That's so clearly psilocybin.
And this is the goddess Hathor, the goddess of the cow, by the way.
There you go.
The goddess of the cow. And that's a vase. And anyone who's grown oyster mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms know that you can put the substrate into a vase like that with openings and mushrooms will come out of the holes. And so that natural culture technique of collecting cow patty. So cows go to ponds to drink. The blue lotus grows in ponds. The blue lotus is blue. The psilocybin mushrooms turn blue. The mushrooms are golden in color. Gold and blue colors are sacred in Egyptology. And in ancient Egyptian culture. So now I was not the first person to discover this. Actually, I saw this from an article that was published by Azim Abdel, a friend of mine, a mycologist in Egypt, who presented it at a conference. And
How long ago was this?
This is over 2,000 years of age.
No, I mean when they
2016.
When they brought us to the 2016.
2016.
That's kind of crazy, isn't it?
It is. And then Kalindi, the great Kalindi from Detroit, he unfortunately died of COVID. But he also, from his African heritage, also believed that, and he was rediscovering his African heritage. And this is called re-indigenization, rediscovering that which your ancestors practiced, even though the linear transition of knowledge may have been cut. But this is taxonomically accurate for growing Psilocybe cubensis, and it grows on cow dung. Cow goes to ponds. If you went to get the water lily, you'd run into this constantly. Now this, and with the Hathor, with this temple is now, they get less than 1 millimeter of rain a year. And the Nile used to be flooding all the time. It was the breadbasket of the world. But they built the dams, and restricted the flooding, and so the climate changed. So the modern Egyptologists have no reference. And so when you have climate change, the ecosystem changes, then the scientists of day don't have the familiarity as the experts thousands of years ago.
Right.
So they become rare, they become scarce, and the generational knowledge is lost. But now there's a real big re-indigenization movement in Egypt combining the blue lotus with Psilocybe cubensis.
What is the psychedelic compound in the blue lotus?
That's a debatable thing. There's a really complex chemistry there. I'm not an expert on that, but I've talked to my other friends who are experts. There seems to be an entourage effect of multiple agents. So I can't really speak authoritatively to that, but I have been told that there are several active ingredients, and they think the entourage effect of them together creates this heightened state of awareness. And I think that as an admixture with psilocybin makes a lot of sense.
Are contemporary people taking blue lotus?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Is there like a community of people?
There's a massive community, but because blue lotus now has become scarce because ponds are scarce. So I put out there a reward of $1,000 for anyone who can find, DNA of psilocybin mushrooms in any of the wells or ancient ponds, used to be ponds, in the Egypt area. Because if we can find the DNA in the vase and the substrate, then we can actually prove this theory.
Right.
It's more than a hypothesis, because I've met many Egyptian mycologists now who absolutely believe this is true. not scientifically, but sort of intuitively from their culture, this makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense. And if you've got it on these hieroglyphs.
And they were known as the flesh of the gods, which is the very same name when translated for Teananacatl from Mesoamerica. The psilocybin mushrooms were known, Psilocybin mexicana, as flesh of the gods. So it's interesting, in both sides of the world, they had the same interpretation. Mushrooms were not allowed back in this time to be picked by commoners. They were only reserved for the royalty.
Oh, boy. Doesn't it always work out that way?
Yeah, it seems to.
Another thing that's really fascinating is depictions of ancient saints and even Jesus Christ with a halo, and that the halo is essentially the bottom of a mushroom. It's a very different halo. When we think about a halo, we think about like a frisbee that's hovering over an angel's head or a saint's head. But the ancient depictions of them weren't that. The ancient depictions of them, you saw those ribs that made it look like the bottom of a psilocybin mushroom.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No, I
oh,
didn't
come
know
on.
that.
I'm teaching you this?
Yeah.
Come on. Jamie will pull up these images. But these images of Christ, there's many different religious figures, and they have this halo that's very different than the more modern halo. The modern halo being this like circle. This is not a circle. It's a circle, but it's a mushroom. It's essentially they're explaining that these godly, holy people were under the influence of psilocybin. I think.
What we can't,
and not just me.
What we can't prove some of these ideas today, what we can prove is like the Johns Hopkins New York University study, that religious belief systems are enhanced through the use of psilocybin.
Which totally
makes sense. So we can argue about the past, but we can't. We have really good scientific methodology now for analyzing the effects of psilocybin, and it's profound. It's profound.
You got any of those images?
It's not. What's coming up really is us talking about it before, and then a bunch of pictures of mushrooms. So I was trying to find out.
There's some better ones.
I know, but it's not. I didn't get.
You can't find them.
I wasn't getting.
Man, the government's pulled them off the internet. Man, that's not one.
Yeah.
That's the ones that I've seen are far clearer than that.
I'll just show you there.
Yes. Those.
Yeah.
Like, look at that one, which is crazy that you have to find. You have to go to us.
That's.
See what I googled.
Look at
I
that.
can see the one on the left.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, that essentially looks exactly like that.
I've never seen that.
That's crazy that you can't find that anymore, and we clearly found it in the past because we talked about it.
Well, that may be the effect of Joe Rogan, right? You could just overwhelm the entire internet with images. So,
I mean, look at the bottom of that one in particular, the one in the center.
Yeah.
I mean, that looks exactly like that halo.
yeah, that's not a.
Which totally makes sense. Look at
It
that.
does.
Okay, there's one. Look at that image.
Yeah.
So this is the old school halo. The old school halo clearly looks like the bottom of a mushroom.
I'm blown away.
You're blown away.
Hiding in plain sight,
I
right?
can't believe that I'm teaching you this. I can't believe you. How come nobody told you this?
I don't know.
You said you knew Jack. You knew Jack when he was alive. This was like his primary concern towards the end of his life. He was working on a book.
Yeah, I mean, the limitation of life. Unfortunately, we have all these great people who pass when they're at the peak of their knowledge. And that's the other thing that I think psilocybin has really informed me is that Joe Rogan and Paul Stamets are talking. Jamie is there, but we have such a thin slice of reality. And when you're on psilocybin, the unanimity of universal consciousness, to be involved in something you realize is so large.
Yeah.
Did you see the galactic images from the Rubin telescope that came out yesterday?
No, I did not.
Millions and millions of new galaxies, literally millions of new galaxies. Wow. I think 2,100 new asteroids in near-Earth orbit.
Oh, fun.
Oops.
Well, there's already 900,000 of them.
Yeah. So but this has just happened.
Wow.
But this is. Yeah.
Wondering how many of those people out there are tripping balls.
Just got released, the largest telescope in the world, and there are millions of galaxies. Millions of galaxies. And so, from my experience, which I will admit I came from a Christian background, so my first times on psilocybin mushrooms is very Christ-oriented.
God, look at
and
that.
then as I got more and more into the psilocybin experience, I realized that this is just this concept that we live in this great expanse, and I'm an assembly of molecules. So are you. We didn't exist before we were born. we will disassemble, decompose, and we'll go back into the cosmic dust. And this is part of the continuum of existence.